Thank you for joining me on this latest installment of Ask Mitch. As always, you can send your questions to Mitch at northwoodcc.org. Please keep your questions to 100 words or less so that I can do my best to answer those questions succinctly. Today's question is a really wonderful question. The question asks, what happens to those who have never heard the gospel? And I want to start by simply acknowledging there is some disagreement among Christians over what happens to those who hear the gospel. A Christian must believe that the only way to be saved is through Christ's work. But there are some Christians who would say that maybe there is a way for someone to be saved through Christ's work apart from hearing and responding to the gospel. But I don't find that particularly convincing because we don't see any hints of that in Scripture. In fact, Romans chapter 10 tells us that faith comes through hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ. So it's my understanding that the only way someone can be saved from their sins and experience life in the presence of God for all eternity is through the gospel being proclaimed, from them hearing the gospel proclaimed, and responding to that gospel with faith. Now, the reason this question feels difficult for some of us is there's an implied injustice that's felt, and we kind of imagine it something like this. What happens to that innocent person in China or another closed country who doesn't hear the gospel? Isn't it unfair that they would be condemned to hell if they've not heard the gospel and had a chance to respond to it in faith? And I would simply say to that kind of notion is it misunderstands the reality of the human condition. Is there's no innocent person out there. Romans again tells us that creation itself is sufficient to teach us that there is a God who created the world, a God we're accountable to, and a God that we deserve to be punished by. And so there's actually no one who's innocent, no one who doesn't deserve to be punished. And if that was actually the case, it would undercut our reason for telling the gospel. If people who hadn't heard the gospel somehow could be saved through Christ's work another way, why would we ever want to evangelize? Actually, that would be one of the worst things we could possibly do, because suddenly they would hear the gospel, and if they don't respond in faith, now they're condemned before they weren't. And so, in fact, I think the need to proclaim the gospel is dependent upon the fact that all humanity, whether or not they've heard the gospel, stands under God's judgment for their sin and has sufficient evidence through creation to know there's a God that they're accountable to. And further, I think it misunderstands what could really be said to be unjust. The surprise for us should not be that humans are held accountable. That's perfectly just. If we've done wrong, we deserve to be punished. The surprise, the thing that should really surprise us and be stunning to us, is the fact that any humans can be saved at all. That God, in His grace and kindness and mercy, decided He wouldn't let sin, death, and punishment be the final word, but instead sent His Son Jesus to satisfy the punishment for our sin, so that even some could be saved. So, of course, there's a lot more that could be said, but I hope that's helpful as we think through what happens to those who don't hear the gospel. And I hope that will stir all of us up then to take preaching the gospel, evangelizing our friends and family more seriously, because eternal stakes really are on the line. People need to hear the gospel. It is the words of life to those who are perishing. Until next time, I hope this is a blessing to you.